Good morning, everybody. I'm always impressed with the number of people that come out on a Sunday morning to a session like this. Thank you for coming out. So this is Casting Light on the Dark Web, Dispelling Myths and Using it to Preserve Your Anonymity. If you're expecting a different session, you're in the wrong room.
Okay. So we're going to start with a little disclaimer, and we'll probably repeat this a couple times throughout. We weren't actually asked to say this, but we thought it'd be good advice. We are not lawyers, and we're definitely not the lawyers that are affiliated with your library or your state or your country. So keep that in mind. I think what we're saying is all above the board and stuff that will be applicable to most libraries, but kind of just like when you get on a flight, in the very unlikely case that something goes wrong, just keep this in mind so that you won't sue us.
Yeah.
I also wanted to say, I think Matt and I are kind of a unique partnership in that I think a lot of the presenters at ALA are really cutting-edge innovators, want to talk about the emerging technologies. I don't really see myself in that way to that extent where I just get really amped up about a technology. I have a background in working with individuals with disabilities, individuals from marginalized social and economic positions. And so when I look at technologies like this, I really want to evaluate and say, does this technology provide some benefit to those people, or is it just another tool that creates greater discrepancies from those who are able and privileged and those who are not? So that's kind of the tack that I took in learning more about the dark web, and I found that it has the potential to be a tool that can really benefit in those ways. Mm-hmm. I think Matt has a much stronger background than myself in working with systems, working in libraries.
Yeah, I work at a public library, so I came out from that angle of get to that slide right there. Introduce ourselves a little bit. Well, let's just go back a little. So my name is Matt Beckstrom. I'm the systems librarian at the Lewis and Clark Library in Helena, Montana. I've been there for 20 years. My background is in computer science. I come from a tech background, and one day I got the job at the library. I thought, well, what the heck, I'll work for a library, and realized I loved it. Got my library degree a couple years ago. But I'm one of the few people, well, not few people, but I'm one of the few people that I was on the internet before it was a thing. Yeah, I remember I was at the University of Montana. I won't tell you what year it was, but it was a while ago. And I remember someone telling me about this new thing you could do where you could chat with people around the world. I mean, this was really earlier in the early internet. And I remember when I was getting my first degree, I remember the professors at my school asking me, "What is this internet thing? How does that work?" And so I remember I did a class for my teachers on what the internet was and how to get on it, So I always thought that was funny. So I've got a little bit of history in the internet. It's changed a little bit since then.
Yes. And I, on the other hand, was born after the internet was already a thing.
How old are you, man? I forgot. No, I'm just joking. We won't get to that.
So, my background, like I said, I have a bachelor's degree in communication sciences and disorders. I worked in a preschool for children with disabilities. I then I got a job at Wichita State University's library, really fell in love with it, so I went to Emporia State, got my MLS degree from there, graduated just last year with my MLS. Always really wanted to do a PhD though, and I had the opportunity, a lot less obligations, didn't want to get in a position where I get 40 years old, have a family, and then it's really hard to go back to school. So I just dived right into the PhD.
That's where I'm at right now.
So
this guy's crazy. He goes to school
student.
to school to school. I was like, anyway, you're crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I say wait till you're 40. So we're going to talk about kind of the overline of what we're going to talk about really quick here. And I just want to say really quick too that, excuse me, my presenting style and Brady's as well is pretty loose. We're not real rigid in what we're going to talk. I mean, we're not going to be like shushing you or anybody. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. Throw something fairly soft at me to get my attention if we're not watching. I do want this to be a dialogue. I'd like to talk about things and have some questions because we are going to stay pretty high level with this. We're not going to try to dig too deep into the nitty gritty of how things work, but we think it's important for you to get a little bit of background about how things work. We'll obviously start out with a history of the internet, which everything should, but I think that we need to look at the internet, excuse me, from the point of view of privacy and security, and really try to draw a picture for you of how we came about the dark web, how out of necessity it appeared. So we'll talk about that a little bit, and then we do want to talk about how the dark web works, because I think it's important to understand some of the dynamics of how the information flows over the wires there. So it shows you how you can use it in these ways to preserve the anonymity of the people using it, and how the different, there's many different, dark web platforms, but we're going to talk about three big ones. But how each one of them kind of was born out of a necessity, a need that was there. We'll talk about the three big dark web platforms we're going to talk about. We'll do the Internet 2 project. We'll do the Freenet, and we'll do Tor, which I think most people probably. Has anyone never heard of Tor? Interesting. Okay. Put your hands down. No, sir. Did you have a question?
Can you tell us if this will be available and if we're given permission to adapt it for our use?
Oh, yeah, I have no problem with it, yeah. The question was if the slides will be available and can it be adapted for their use? Yes.
Yeah.
The slides have notes on them too. They're probably not as detailed as our speaking would be, but yeah, the slides have notes on them too. So yeah, and our contact information is there as well, so you can get a hold of us.
This is also being recorded.
Oh, thanks for reminding me. Oh man. I don't know if there'll be transcripts or not. I don't.
We are willing.
No, I'm being told no.
We are willing to share as much as we can.
Yeah.
However, we will make another disclaimer. We're presenting this in part because we wrote a book on this topic that is being published as a forthcoming Lita guide. We have a little bit of advertising scattered throughout, but not too much. We want this to be standalone mostly. But as far as where we can cross, as far as copyright and what we're telling you overlaps with the book, we have to be a little bit careful about that. But we want to share as much as we can with you.
Yeah, so if you want help with things later on, buy the book first, then call us. No, I'm just joking. We're talking about some popular dark websites. I was hoping to do more of a demonstration, but I've got dark web tools on my laptop, which will not connect up with this system because I bought a new one that only has USB-C. It doesn't have HDMI or anything. So maybe I'll just hold my laptop up and you guys can. No, probably won't have time anyway. We're going to try to do it at the end, but yeah. And then we want to spend a little time talking about dark web in the library. How it can be used in the library. Is anybody using any dark web tools right now in their libraries? You can raise your hand. It's okay. We're not being recorded. It's all right. All right. But we want to talk about some different ways. And one other thing Brady may have mentioned. I don't know if you mentioned that. I'm a public librarian. I work for a public library, and Brady's an academic librarian. So we kind of have two different perspectives at that point too, coming at it from different views. Oops.
Okay. All right, so to set the scene, we don't want to just tell you what the dark web is without demonstrating or showing the reason why we think it is important. And so I just clipped these headlines from different news stories over the last year, and you're probably familiar with all of these topics. Internet surveillance, NSA, the repeal of net neutrality. In the wake of all this, there has been an increased use of the dark web, as shown in their statistics, and an increased interest in the dark web. And so we're trying to satisfy that need with our presentation today. Additionally,
I like Jump.
Jump?
I just noticed that now.
I had a filter going all over it, and I forgot to turn that off before I clipped that article.
A filter that changes certain names into other names? Yeah.
And another issue, we're hoping with this being ALA, we'll have some international audiences that'll at least watch the recording if they're not here present with us. And the dark web, we found, is a very good tool for countries that censor certain parts of the internet. And in fact, certain websites like Facebook have created dark websites specifically for individuals who could not otherwise access Facebook via the World Wide Web.
The normal way, yeah.
Another example, and I presented on this topic just briefly as one of those lightning sessions a couple years ago in Chicago.
That's where we met.
And that's where we met. And this is the example I use, talking about cookies, which are basically packets of information that follow you as you travel site by site that are collected by your browser and shared. And the example I give, because I experience it all the time, is the little banner ads you get when you travel to websites. So you go to Amazon, for instance, you're looking for a certain product, like our book, and
Oh, I didn't even notice that. Wow, that was good.
and then you travel to another website and you see that banner ad for what you were just looking for. And that's really what cookies are meant for. They're to make relevant ads, they're to save your login credentials, stuff like that. And they're actually designed to really improve and benefit your browsing experience, or that's what they say. My concern with that is whether we're actually giving permission for that information to be collected, to what extent that information is collected, how long that information is stored, and how that information can be used. And those are answers that we don't necessarily have on hand. So those are some of the concerns that I have that made me first look into the dark web and say, is this some tool that is free for all to use that could actually stop some of this collection of information without my permission? From there, I also wanted to look at censorship in different countries and talk with some people in those countries and ask, how do you use the dark web, and is it actually beneficial? Is it something you can use? Is it something that's being blocked by your country, and so on?
I like the old story. We were talking about this yesterday. I wasn't sure if it was one of those internet fables of the father who sits down to use the computer and all the ads are for baby products and diapers, and then come to find out his daughter was pregnant, didn't tell anybody. That's that old story of how the cookies track people across the internet. And do we ever confirm if that's true or not? I mean, was it? I for some reason I feel like it's one of those urban myths.
It was, but
does anybody know for
being
sure?
a librarian, it's probably not good to.
Say
we're
not yet.
It was direct mail.
It was direct mail. Oh, okay, so there I am. So a little bit about what is the dark web, and we have to start out with the obligatory iceberg analogy, which gets used for so many things. But if you think of an iceberg, they say 90% of an iceberg is under the water surface. And you can think of the internet the same way. Everything above the water is what we call the surface web. And this is where you're going to spend most of your time on news sites and Facebook and you're just normal web browsing around your shopping sites. I mean, that's kind of what we call the surface web. And that feels like a very large part of the internet because that's what we spend most of our time doing. In reality, the numbers aren't really known. There's a lot of guesstimates about how big the internet really is. But in reality, at least 80 or 90% of the internet is what we call the deep web, which is a part of the internet that is not readily available using normal methods. It's going to be mostly behind a paywall. So if you were to pay for a subscription database, anything behind that paywall or behind that authentication wall is going to be part of the deep web. A lot of you look at a lot of content in corporations or corporate websites are all going to be behind authentication walls. That's information that's available on the internet to certain people for certain reasons. That's all going to be part of the deep web. And since it's not indexed, Google will spend a lot of time indexing, or other search engines indexing the surface web, and that's mostly what you're searching for when you're looking for surface web material anyway. They are not going to spend a lot of time indexing the deep web, mostly because they can't. If it's behind a paywall, if it's behind an authentication wall, they can't get to it. So we don't know exactly how big the internet is in reality. Am I missing any deep websites? I can't remember.
No,
okay.
I think that's pretty inclusive. I would just say that this is a really important distinction to make right here, because I remember when we were talking about this in the past, when I've presented this in the past, when we were talking about writing a book on this topic, this is something that people tended to be thrown off by. I remember one publisher we spoke to said, is this book going to teach us how to hack into people's databases? No, that's not what the dark web is at all. That lies within the realm of the deep web.
Right. So then you've got this 80% of the internet that's the deep web, and that's where we put our information and But then you've always got this little tiny dark, bit at the bottom, and it really isn't the bottom. It's actually kind of spread all throughout that we call the dark web. And we hate the name dark web. It really should be something more like, what did we say, the hidden web?
Anonymous web.
Anonymous
has been
web.
used.
Because dark, it automatically gives the impression in someone's mind of something evil and wrong, But the dark web is only a part of the internet that's available using specialized tools. So you're not going to get to it using your normal web browser. You're not going to get to it using normal internet methods. You have to find some kind of extra tool or some kind of extra software step to get onto the dark web.
Right.
That's kind of where we start
It's
here.
dark because you can't see it from the
Surface web, yeah. But in reality, and we'll talk about this a bit more when we get to how the dark web works, but it's good to know that the dark web really is a part of the entire internet. It's on top of the deep web. It's on top of the surface web. It's just kind of hidden behind the layers. You can't see it. We have a couple pictures here. You can talk about those, man. Those are your pictures.
The picture. Yeah. Oh boy. So above is an entry of the deep web. So that would be like the interlibrary loan database for Emporia State University. And so that's a deep web. You have to fill in your authentication details in order to access that database and to select your interlibrary loan items. On the other hand, the image up bottom is the dark web. So that would be Tor. That's the Tor homepage. You have to download that software package. We'll show you how to do that. It's very easy to do, but nonetheless, you have to download a special browser in order to access the dark web.
Any questions so far? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, is that a situation where, if you access that, you're not going to have, Secret Service coming to your house?
The question was, I shouldn't repeat this question. If you're using that, are you going to have like the Secret Service come into your house or something like that? No, not right away. It depends on
It really depends on
what you do.
What you're doing once you have the platform. I use Tor every single day. I have it downloaded on my phone. We'll talk about this, but you can download it on your Android phone. You can use it all the time. It's housed within a Firefox shell. You use it just like you would Firefox. It's very easy to use. There's nothing illegal about just using the dark web. It's all about the sites you visit.
To the best of our knowledge, no one's had their door knocked down for using the dark web.
That's what Tor's website will say as well.
Yes, go ahead.
I've been afraid to use Tor or any part of the dark web for fear that those who misuse it, like criminals, terrorists, Snuffport, etc., would be able to track me and send me unsolicited.
So the question, not really a question, the kind of worried about using the dark web in case the people who are using it might be able to track you or find you. That kind of goes against the point of the dark web, yeah. Unsolicited ads, no. Once again, it's all about how you use it. I mean, if you spend a lot, we'll talk about this a bit more in a bit, but if you spend a lot of time on sites that you probably shouldn't go to, you're always exposing yourself to those kinds of risks. But by the very nature of the dark web, you're a bit more protected to begin with. Go ahead.
Things is one, can you use it for like the positive stuff, like say sex workers cannot get to stuff anymore because of the attempt to stop trafficking? There's been a lot of censorship. Also, will it enable you to say get to videos from other countries that are blocked by region codes?
So kind of the question is, can accessing information you wouldn't normally be able to get to? Yes, you can use Tor. They're not really designed for, I mean, if you think like Netflix, if you want to watch a Netflix video that's regional to Europe, that's not available in America or something like that, it's really not designed for that kind of information, live data traffic. It's not going to work that well. There's too much layers of encryption. It would slow things down too much. But yeah, you can use those, and that's kind of, we'll talk about that when we get to the history of the internet. That's kind of the point of some of these dark web tools, is to get around some of these barriers that exist, socioeconomic barriers that, countries or, different reasons.
Yeah, and I didn't include this graphic. I should have. Tor publishes a graphic that shows the areas of the world that are using the dark web the most, and it's very compelling to see which countries are using it the most, because it's the countries you would think for the most part would ban a lot of content. China, and several Middle Eastern countries really have a very high usage, as well as some countries that have more liberal political climates, like Italy and France, Britain tend to have a lot, and the United States, of course. But
And
it's used a lot in those countries.
And we have a slide at the end, or near the end, that has some of the websites for the different dark web tools. If you go on the Tor website, you can see that information too. It's really interesting. All right, let's go to the next one. So we have to start with the brief history of the internet and of the dark web. So, after the earth cooled, the internet was formed. But I mean, I don't want to spend too much time. I know we all know a little bit about how the internet came about. It started out as a government, United States government activity called ARPANET was its eventual name. It had some names before that too. But the idea for this early network of computers was to connect different computers together to facilitate communication. The old story I always heard was because of nuclear war, but that was one reason, but it wasn't always. They wanted to be able to have a way for these different military institutions to communicate quickly using computers. So they designed a bunch of protocols and designed a bunch of techniques to facilitate communication. So at that time, they weren't thinking of privacy and security, and they weren't thinking about tracking people on this system. They were trying to make communication as quick and as easy and as possible. They wanted to make sure it happened quickly. You can read those. I was worried those slides are going to be too small. Eventually, other networks were formed. There were a lot of different, universities or other organizations that formed their own computer networks because it was kind of a new thing, and they started to see the benefits of doing this. And to make things easy, they all kind of started to adopt the same principles, the same technology, the same protocols and communication standards. They kind of all had to start using the same ones. And they started connecting to each other. So we started getting networks of networks. And eventually, I'm trying not to skip ahead too far, you started getting universities and other people that started joining on to this network of networks. Eventually, ARPANET itself was decommissioned. And what was left over were all these different networks connected together. And that was kind of the early internet, as we call it, network of networks. And like I said, they all started sharing the same protocols, the same communication standards that was necessary for them to talk to each other. But as one group, so you've got your own, organization here, your university, and you've got all your computers networked together, and you create that connection then to the backbone with other networks. You don't want people coming onto your computers. So for the first time, people started thinking to themselves, well, how do I keep other people from getting into my network? I mean, I want to have access to this shared information, but I don't want them to get into my network. So they started creating authentication walls, which was the simple way to just kind of put up a username and a password and force people to log in. And that worked for quite a while. When I first got on the internet, just a couple years ago, that's what it was. I mean, everything was open. You could communicate back and forth, but it was all, once again, it was all meant to facilitate communication, make it as fast as possible, and to make it as easy as possible. Security, privacy. Security was starting to become a concern, but privacy and tracking of people wasn't a concern at that point. Eventually, the corporations got involved, and then it became a public entity. And once corporations and other governments started getting involved in the internet and how it works, then we started seeing some problems with people being watched, people being tracked. And of course, you got advertisers and corporations who can see great benefit to watching what you do. I mean, they're trying to sell you product. And like Brady had talked about earlier, you've got these little cookies, I forget who invented the cookie. I looked it up one time. Eventually they found ways to try to exploit the communication standards. They've tried to find ways to make the communication work to their advantage. So you've got businesses, corporations, and advertisers who are using it to try to track you. You've got governments and other agencies who are using it, trying to find ways to track you, to find out who you are. And a lot of people didn't like that. I think so. You got anything to say? Did I miss anything?
Are we going to talk about the dark web?
Oh, I think we get to the next thing.
Oh, okay.
We went through these together, I swear we did.
Oh, yes. There we go.
So a lot of people then started to come up with ways, well, we need to be able to communicate, and we want to find ways to communicate in ways that are not exposed to these normal communication fallbacks that exist. So there's three. Well, like I said, there's lots and lots and lots of different dark web platforms. Literally hundreds and hundreds of them. They're almost all specialized. Does anybody here remember like Napster, or those are dark web platforms as well. Now, I'm not saying I ever used one. I'm not saying all my music was legally downloaded, but those were early dark web platforms as well. They were created in a way to share information that you wouldn't normally be able to share using the surface web. So those are examples of other types of very specialized types of dark web platforms. But three kind of stood out a little bit. They kind of came out as standing out in unique ways. The first one I'm going to talk about is I2P, the Internet 2 project. It was designed as a way to facilitate communication in areas where communication is not really allowed. So this was, to allow whistleblowers, political dissidents, people in countries whose internet connections were being monitored or blocked. It was designed in a way to get people onto the internet and to share information in a way that couldn't be censored or blocked. And it is probably the second most popular, the second largest type of dark web platform on the internet right now. Freenet, the Free Internet Project, is one of my favorites. It was really, really designed to facilitate the publishing of information in a way that is censorship-free. So the Freenet project is really about storing information within its network in a distributed model. We'll talk about that a little bit here too. That prevents people from knowing who put it there, who's reading it, who's accessing it. So you see a lot of blogs are popular on Freenet, web pages. A lot of information is available up there, and it's meant to be in a way that's completely anonymous, to allow people to speak their mind without fear of kickback from a government or a corporation.
By the way, created by a graduate student as part of his master's thesis.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it was designed by a graduate student. Still use it today. And the last one is Tor. Tor originally stood for the Onion Router, and we'll talk a little bit about why it was called that, because ogres have layers, of course.
Yes.
But eventually they stopped calling it, they started calling it Tor, because it was easier to say, and eventually they just dropped the whole Onion Router deal and just started calling it Tor. But Tor is the most popular that we're aware of. There might be one out there we don't know. Dark web tool available. It's probably the most widely used. Easiest to use. It really is just a browser you install, and just the way we'll talk about the way it works. But it's the purpose of Tor is to access surface web sites anonymously. As we know, when you use a browser on your computer to access sites, even if you think you're being protected, even if you think you're being safe, there's so many different ways that you really are a beacon on the internet. There's the things called fingerprinting, where they can fingerprint your computer or your browser, all the different options available on your computer, and what you do. Not all the options on your computer, that was a mistake, but you kind of already broadcast who you are. Even if you block cookies, there's always other ways for them to get around those things. So Tor was kind of developed to get you onto the surface web in a way that kind of stripped out a lot of that fingerprinting in the background, so you could surf the normal web a bit more safely.
I think we have a question.
Oh, we have a question. Go ahead. On the left side there.
Me?
Yes.
Okay. So I was wondering about for Tor. Could you use that would it be more or less safely able to say, like, pay your bill? Because I actually know my grandmother recently had her identity stolen online. So that's what I was the most curious about for this kind of browsing.
You make me answer.
The question was if you can use Tor for like everyday browsing, to help to protect your identity. Yes.
In theory, yes, it should be much more secure, and I use it myself for those purposes.
Yeah.
Like I said, I use Tor all the time. It's the only browser I use, and that's really what I wanted to make sure I hammer home more than anything else in this presentation, assuming you all haven't used the dark web or not very much, is that Tor is the easiest one to use. It acts just like Firefox. You can go in just like you'd be using Firefox, visit any regular website, but it uses the encryption system that Matt will talk about momentarily, and by that means it creates an extra layer of security.
Yeah, so Brady is right. I use normal Firefox for my normal browsing, but if I do anything that's going to be something that personal for myself, whether it's banking or research, I use Tor almost exclusively. Just because, so I can. If you're going to do watch videos or go to YouTube, you don't want to use Tor for that kind of stuff. It's just not. It's not designed for that kind of communication. And once we talk about how it works, you'll see why.
It's very slow.
So
for the most part.
I think we had one more question over here really quick, and then I'll do way in the back. Go ahead. Yeah.
What's the difference between using a browser like Tor to browse the internet anonymously and switching an existing browser to private browsing?
So the question was, what is the difference between using Tor or just using your browser in like a privacy mode? Is that the question?
Yeah.
So the difference is, we've all seen nowadays that the browsers, all the major browsers have some kind of private browsing mode, in private. I forget what they call it in Firefox. But the difference between them is that those will do their best to kind of strip out some of the identifying information about you. They'll try to block some cookies. But things like your IP address are still being broadcast. A lot of information about your computer is still being broadcast. So it's better than just using a regular browser, but it's not as good as using a dark web tool.
And by the way, that brings up another kind of concern, that Tor is more secure, but it's not perfect.
Yeah.
And so you don't want to go into using Tor and assume I can do whatever now because I'm completely protected from any kind of surveillance or giving up my information. Because if you go to a website, for instance, if you log into Facebook, once you're within Facebook, Facebook can still have some knowledge about what you're visiting within their site. It just won't be shared to other sites you visit afterwards.
Yeah, the securest way to browse the internet is to not browse the internet. Question way in the back.
Is Tor used on your mobile phone and stuff?
Is Tor available on your phone? Yeah. Yeah, there's a couple of different products.
Just mention that briefly.
Brady will pass his phone around to show you all. There's one called Orbot, and there's Tor browser you can get for your phone.
So I think they might have it on Apple now. I know they were having some problems.
Who
with
uses
that.
Apple? Come on.
It's been on Android for a long time, though, and if you just type in Tor within the App Store, you'll get the Tor browser that you can use on your phone. That's what I always use. Or they have the Orbot, which is a proxy.
Yeah.
And you can just turn that on, and then turn it into VPN mode, and then browse the internet on whatever app that way.
Yes.
Are you aware of any controversies around the use of, say, Tor or a dark web browser in the workplace?
So the question was, are we aware of any controversies using Tor or the dark web platforms in a workplace, like a corporate workplace?
Yeah, I could imagine some employers would be concerned that their employees are trying to use
To
dark web.
get secrets out, or
They might not be able to know what their employees are doing, or something along those lines. Or if it's used for patrons, say,
we'll talk about that. We're going to get to libraries in a little bit, but as far as corporations go, once again, like Brady said earlier, we're not lawyers. We're not making any legal advice whatsoever. But they would, speaking as a system administrator, you would know if someone is using a dark web tool on your network. It's the traffic is there. You can see that. You can't read what it is they're doing, but I would know if someone was doing it on my network. And who was doing it, because the tools inside of a network like that are going to be more specific. I would not do it in a corporate workspace or your employer without information, without talking to somebody. Because
the IT department has to do the downloading.
right. Some places, depending on the security, yeah. So I would speak with but I've not heard of any controversies. I've not heard of any news. Brady, of anyone being?
I haven't heard of anything recently about it.
Recently?
For sure. I use it in my workplace. I did check, and it was they didn't really care, but I use it all the time just because I think it's more secure even at work. So I just use it.
And I'm the administrator of my network, so I do what I please. Go ahead, sorry. So I'm going to spend the next 2 hours talking about how the dark web works. It's fine. I wish we had time because And when we were doing the research for this book, I must have spent hours and hours and hours just reading articles and white papers about how some of these tools work, and it's really fascinating. I mean, some of you might find it as fascinating as I do, but it's really kind of interesting. So go to the next slide. So let's talk about I2P a little bit, the Internet 2 project. And like I said, I'm going to speak at a very high level here. I don't want to get in the nitty-gritty of how these individually work, but I kind of want to show you that we talked about earlier the Internet, how it was designed to be open. Computers wanted to connect. They did everything they could to facilitate connections, make them quicker, faster, and to make Internet communication as quick as possible. So when you start the I2P client on your computer, it advertises itself to other I2P clients, and it connects up, and it creates a little kind of a network in the memory of all the other devices it can find. And then it uses this tunnel idea. It creates a tunnel. It uses an outgoing and incoming tunnel. They're going to be different paths. So that tunnel is going to go out using different nodes, different computers on the network, and then get the information and pull it back using a different method. And each step along that tunnel is encrypted. So each device in the tunnel is aware of where it got it from and where to go next. It doesn't know the tunnel. It doesn't know where it's going. It just knows how to get there. And so along the way, it's encrypting and decrypting the information as it's going till it gets to the point where it receives information. It's re-encrypted, packaged back up, put back down the tunnel, and sent back to the device. So can anyone think of a reason why this would make it slower? Yeah, you don't browse the dark web for speed, that's for sure. When you're trying to do as much as you can to make it as secure as you can, encrypt it as much as possible, you're going to slow things down. Question?
So essentially, you're joining a network and allowing your computer to be used on this pathway.
Correct. So what you were saying, essentially, you're joining a network, you're allowing your computer to be used in this way. Correct. So when I put the I2P client on my computer, I2P operates a little differently. It actually modifies the settings on your computer. So all the communication on your computer is being sent down the I2P tunnels. But yeah, we're using the surface web. We're using the deep web here to using computers on that web to create a web within a web. Basically, is what we're doing. A dark net. Go ahead.
Is there any difference, for personal use, like using Tor for your personal use, using Tor versus some of the commercially available VPN products?
Some of the I use a VPN on my computer as well. So the question was, is there a difference between using Tor or using some of the commercial VPN products? One, Tor is free. That's a benefit. The VPNs are going to work really well too at blocking some communication, but it's still not quite as secure or as private as a dark web tool would be. I use especially if I'm in a hotel. Hotel networks are terrible, people. Yeah, they're terrible, terrible places. You want to talk about dirty web? They're horrible. I use a VPN almost exclusively on my computers and my phones especially when I'm traveling, just because hotel networks are slow and you don't know who's on that network with you. So just for my normal browsing, I'll use a VPN. But once again, I signed up. I have an account. They know who I am. They say they don't, and I'm sure they don't. But those are all records that are stored someplace. But if I'm going to do some private browsing, if I'm going to be doing some personal research or working on when I was writing the book with Brady, we did all that. I did a lot of that stuff on the dark web just because I don't want that out there. So there is some differences, but not much. Oh, yes, question.
If somebody actually wants to monitor you, I'm picturing my computer sends out a signal for I2P to find other nodes. If somebody's already out there, even though it'll get encrypted, they will have one of those steps. Am I correct?
So what the question was is when you connect your computer up to the I2P network, for example, you're sending out that information, and is it possible for someone else to see that communication? Yes. Nothing's going to be 100%. But the way that the information travel is designed in these networks is to not broadcast that information. So it tries to encrypt the packets and put them into distributed databases in ways that don't say who you are. It's not 100%, but yeah, it's still better than it is, but yeah, there's ways of getting around it. And one of the And we all know Edward Snowden, and one of his revelations that he released was a government program to track users on the Tor network by the NSA. I forget what the project was called, but it was trying to get, they had to get something on the computer or find a way to get something on the computer so that when someone was on Tor, they were broadcasting their information all the time, so they weren't truly anonymous. Yeah, nothing's 100%.
Yeah, and the nice thing about all these all three of them, I believe, are constantly updating and trying to improve what they're doing.
Stay
and
one
so
step ahead.
it gets. I mean, there are people trying to compromise the networks, unfortunately, but there's constant action to try to improve the networks over time and make them further secure, further private.
So the Freenet network, that's one of my favorite ones. Freenet, like I said, was designed to facilitate publishing of information, blogs, websites, in a way that was anonymous. And so when your computer joins up to the Freenet network, it gets a copy of a database that's dynamically updating and changing all the time, and it finds other nodes on the network, and it starts communicating with them. And once you're on the Freenet network, your computer could become a part of the distributed file sharing network. So there's little storage locations that are set up on the clients, and if you publish a file to the Freenet network, it gets broken up in pieces and stored all over the place. The benefits of that is that it's not all stored in one place, so someone couldn't hack in and get that one. All they'd get is one piece. They'd have to know how to get the entire piece, all the pieces of the file. It also makes it anonymous, so it's hard to say whose file it is because it's hosted in dozens or hundreds of different sites. It's not something that you can say, well, it was on Matt's computer, so it's obviously Matt's file. He created it. That's not the case. There's also a high level of redundancy. So, I mean, you can imagine if I put my computer in the Freenet network and then I disconnected, that information I had on there that was being stored in that computer is now gone. But it's distributed elsewhere. It's spread around the network. So it's got a great kind of redundancy built into it. But it is slow. I mean, I wish I could show you, but when you try to access a Freenet site, you put out a request on the network, it connects other nodes, and it starts finding little pieces of the database around until it can find enough information to find out where those pieces of those files are, then go get it and bring it all back. So once again, we're talking about speed. So there's actually like an intermediary page. When I say, please load up this web page from the Freenet network, you come up with a page that says, okay, please wait. And you wait. So, and you see a little progress indicator as it's gathering the data from around the network to get it to you. So it's not something you're not going to be browsing the web, nonchalantly because it's going to take too long to load things. But you know the information that people put up there is it's anonymous, it's open, it's free, and if you were in a country where you couldn't say certain things, this is an easy way for you to be able to do that.
Right, and with both Freenet and I2P, the sites are fairly basic. I think I say on one of these slides, it looks like the internet circa 1998. You're not going to have a lot of dynamic elements because those would take just forever to load. So these sites are going to look very basic. When you get to Tor, you're uploading normal sites, so it'll look like the normal web. It'll look like just browsing anything. But I2P and Freenet, they look very basic, the websites. It's mostly about getting information out there.
So you can see on my graphic here, if you were node A and you're requesting information from node F, your request is going to bounce around from node to node to node, and each node is going to make a decision about where to send it next. So the previous node doesn't know. And of course, every step along the way, there's encryption added. There's encryption being removed and added every time, and it's designed in a way so that nodes only know where information is going or going next or coming from. They don't know the origin of this information. Go ahead. So then the Tor works similar to Freenet and a distributed node. Each item or each node on there is called a router on the Tor network. But basically, when you make a request, so on my computer, if I make a request, when my computer connects to the Tor network, it finds a list of other routers on the network, and then when I make a request, it goes to one of the routers, who then routes it to another one, The analogy I always like for this is, you think back to movies like the 80s, those old sci-fi movies, like War Games. I love that movie, where they always show oh, there's a hack coming in. They show that map of the world. There's little lines going back and forth, kind of bouncing around. That's exactly what's kind of going on here. You don't know where it's going. You don't know where the request is going. But at some point, it hits what's called an exit router. And that exit router's goal is to make the request to put it out on the surface web, and then bring the request back into the Tor network and send it back through. So Tor was designed; it was built from the ground up to facilitate the browsing of the surface web in a way that's secure.
Okay, so I'm going to try to speed things up a little bit because
Yeah, we're running out of
we could
time.
talk about this all day,
All
but
day.
we got 13 minutes.
You guys got nothing else to do, right?
So we've already touched on these quite a bit, so I won't spend too much time on this. But I think you can see pretty clearly from what we've said already that these myths on the left side, that the dark web would have no value to an upstanding citizen, that's just entirely incorrect. Everybody benefits from having additional layers of privacy. It's not illegal to use the dark web. There are some provisos on that. We're speaking largely about the United States and largely about private use of the dark web. So I can download it on my personal computer. I can use it whenever I want. There's no problem as long as I'm using sites that have legal content. I can't speak on behalf of all countries because there are several countries in the world that it is illegal to download the dark web. That doesn't, they're constantly trying to put up mirrors and stuff in order so that those people can still download the dark web anyways and use it. But I can't say it's not a crime in all countries around the world. And you don't need to buy anything to use the dark web. It's entirely free. You just go to their websites. I think I have that on the next page here. You just go to their websites and download it. And it's just as simple as downloading pretty much anything.
Move the mouse. It's got to. There you go.
I would say if you haven't used the dark web before, Tor is definitely, as I've said throughout, the easiest one to use. It'll be the most familiar. It also has much easier download process. With I2P in Freenet, you have to modify a few settings in order to use it properly. Especially with I2P, you have to modify some of the settings in your computer in order for it to work properly. Whereas Tor, you just download it and you use it like a browser right away. It's not a problem at all. Okay, so in part of what we want to do in our book is provide an entire, what would you call it, directory of dark websites. The problem with that is the addresses for these sites change fairly often. Facebook is still accurate, I know, so you could try Facebook right now. Basically, like I said, that's for people where Facebook will be blocked in their country, but they can access the dark web. As long as you can access the dark web, you can access Facebook. Some of the other ones I wanted to talk about, Sci-Hub, and maybe you've also heard of Library Genesis. These are available on the surface web. I would venture to guess that they're probably used more often on the dark web. What those are basically copyrighted books and articles that are published in massive online repositories. And it's very tempting to use that sometimes because I work at a small university. I do a lot of research. It's, they have the article I need. All I got to search for it and I can download it. That's one of the websites though where you're breaching copyright, so we're not going to.
We're not advocating you do that at all.
Yeah, we're not advocating for that, but I thought I'd make you aware of that at least. That's something that I think a lot of people do use around the world. And then there's some sites specific to different browsers. I2P I just gave the example of the I2P forum and the Freenet message system, which is basically just a secure email kind of system. That's probably what you compare it most closely to.
If you can't read that last one, it's 0, lowercase n, lowercase They do look like that, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, they're crazy. Okay, so I did want to mention the legal aspects of the dark web because that's what everybody thinks about. And we don't want to cover it up. We don't cover it up in our book. We have a whole chapter about it. I think it's important to make mention of it. I want to be fair and tell both sides because we don't think that what people are saying about the dark web is false. We do believe a lot of illegal activity happens on the dark web, and it's important for you to know about that before you use it. What we've been talking about today and we want to share is that the systems themselves were not designed for these purposes. They do facilitate these purposes because they are private, but that's not what they were designed for. That's not what the creators of these systems want them used for. And they actively try to self-police, and get these sites off of their browsers. And we just think that the platforms themselves hold so much promise for promoting privacy that we don't want it to be overlooked because of this illegal activity. But Silk Road is really the one example that really made the dark web, the story of the evil dark web, a thing. Because that was an exchange that existed for about 4 years. It was shut down over 5 years ago now, the first iteration of it. But it was used to sell illegal drugs and weapons and that sort of bad stuff. It was shut down by the FBI and Interpol in 2013. It did relaunch with some of the people that stuck around. That was shut down as well. There is a 3.0 that came out. By that point, people kind of got the idea that the FBI can figure out who's doing this one way or another, so it's not nearly as prolific any longer. And really, although they can't necessarily track using the highly technical way to identify who is creating this illegal website, what they used was just a very traditional detective method. They just went to internet forums and started asking about it, and eventually they found a post from when the website was being created where the creator of the website had shared his actual name. And from that, they were able to track him down and arrest him. So it was just as simple as that. And Pirate Bay still exists. There was a big thing in the news, when was that, like 7 years ago? Because that was one of the big torrent sites where you'd share copyrighted
Movies and music and yeah.
Yeah, and that was the subject of a major Interpol raid in 2015. All the founders of the site were arrested, but the site remained up, and that's another site. You can access that right now via like Google. But I think it's another site that a lot of people tend to access via the dark web because they'll benefit from that. I think a lot of the sites, though, when I was showing this to some GAs or telling them about this, the dark web, they said, "Can you show us how to do this?" I was like, "Sure, it's not that difficult." And I then said, "Don't go to these websites, though." Well, of course, those are the websites they want to go to. So I gave them some of these websites here, what I call the shocking sites, which are a lot of sites just put up content that looks really horrific, really plays into the dark web mantra of being evil, but there's not actually any way to purchase the objects. It's just to play into that idea of the dark web being evil and get people to create that shock factor, basically. I think a vast majority of the illegal activity now is copyright infringement, which occurs all the time on the surface web as well. Things like the Library Genesis, where they're putting up all those peer-reviewed articles and books, torrent sites for illegal copyrighted movies and music and the like.
Yeah. So, can you use the dark web in libraries? In general, yes. Once again, legal disclaimer: we're not lawyers. Lawyers, or you're not your library board. It is possible if anybody's using E-rate and it has to be filtering for E-rate, that gets more complicated. I can see, like in my library, my public library, I have the Tor browser on all my public computers. We don't do E-rate funding, so there's no issue with us there. And I did go to my county attorney. I went to my director, my county attorney, and made sure everybody was on board and was aware of what I was doing and why I was doing it. That's going to vary from everybody. So I can't say that you can do this in your libraries or not. Please check with your officials before you do anything. And in my situation, I was lucky that our county attorney just basically said, go ahead. You're just providing access to information, which is what libraries do. I was going to try to rewrite my policy and do some other things. He said, don't worry about it. Everything's covered the way it is now. Just unless we have any problems, you're okay. And I've had it now for for over a year, I think, on my public computers, and I've had no one having questions at all. Go ahead.
Are you saying it's impossible to use with E-rate or it's difficult?
I think it can make it difficult because the E-rate is going to require, excuse me, require libraries to use a level of filtering on computers, and once again, they can be turned off with a request.
If you're over age 18
Yeah.
with bona fide reasons
Yeah.
for using it.
But technically, a dark web platform would go around any filter on the computer probably anyway. So, but I can't say if it would be allowed or not. I think it's just more difficult with that.
It's probably easier if somebody like brought their personal device and
Yeah,
used it
yeah.
on your network.
So how can you use it? So I'll talk about public libraries really quick. Like I mentioned, I do use it on my public computer. So when you go to one of my public computers and sit down, you have the choice of Chrome, Firefox, or Tor. And people use it. I can't get specific statistics yet of how many people are using it, but people are using it on my computer. My next step now is to also start using it as an educational tool. I want to start having classes, having handouts for patrons about what is the dark web, how does it protect your privacy, how it can be used to remain private. And I think that's one of the benefits that libraries have is that we can educate our users as well as provide the tools. I mean, we're already offering them a private service. When you come into a public library and use a public computer, that fingerprinting is going to be for that computer at the library, not the person. So you're already giving some level of protection to people to begin with. But I think on top of that, offering them the ability to use Tor and then teaching them about it, how it works and how it can be used, we're going to make it better. We're going to make the networks more efficient and safer for everybody. And last thing really quick, become a part of it. Libraries can become Tor nodes, routers. Libraries can become freenet nodes. And that's happening in the United States now, and that's my step.
And again, I do want to say there's the Library Freedom Project. Check that out. We're not affiliated with that in any way, but they have a lot of information about how libraries can become nodes on the Tor network, information about educating people in libraries about the Tor network. They're doing a lot of really great stuff that you should check out. So I do want to share that information to look up. We're cutting it very close here. We got 1 minute left, and we got to make our publisher happy by quickly mentioning our book. It is coming out in September. It'll be available at Amazon or Roman.com.
Roman.com, Amazon.com.
Oh man, we had a 40% discount.
We had a discount
code, but we
flyer and
forgot
everything.
to put it
Forgot
on
them.
there.
Yeah. Go to the last slide then, because we got to give our usernames.
We're gonna skip that. Okay, there's our contact information. If you email us, we'll send you that 40% off code.
Email one of us. We'll send you the 40% off code for our book. Oh, it's not going anywhere. Question. Way in the back of the left-hand side there.
Hi, I actually run the library freedom project. My name is Allison.
Oh, there you go.
There you go.
And it's not just a BT.Tor, and we run the whole library, so it's part of the Tor project. So I worked for Tor for the last 5 years. So thank you very much, Crazy Tor, for having this talk.
We love it.
I just wanted to note a couple of things about Tor in libraries. It actually does work quite well. The E-rate thing is a little bit complicated, but it does work.
Yeah.
The biggest library that we just got to install Tor browser on all our computers is the Toronto Public Library. And we have Tor Relays running, I think, in like 10 different libraries across the U.S. So I'm doing another talk today about Tor called Practical Anonymity at 4 p.m. with Natalie Cooper, who is the former archivist for the Snowden archive. So that will be
Wow.
Yes.
Thank you so much
Please
for
go
coming.
to
Yeah. I hope we were correct with everything we said. Thank you so much, everybody.
Yes. Please fill out the evaluation cards if you can, and
Yes, please
make
do.
sure you give us the highest score possible.
Or we'll find
Whatever
you.
that
No, I'm
is.
just joking.